You know what's wild? There are literally millions of people making six figures, seven figures even, who are absolutely terrified of opening their bank accounts. And I'm not talking about people making modest incomes who are just barely scraping by. I'm talking about doctors, engineers, executives, consultants, people who should, by every logical measure, be swimming in money. But somehow, they're not. They're living paycheck to paycheck just like everyone else. Maybe worse, actually, because the gap between what they earn and what they have is so massive that it breaks their brain. Like, how is this even possible? You're making $200,000, $300,000, $500,000 a year, and you still have credit card debt. You still can't sleep at night wondering how you'll pay for an emergency. You still feel trapped in your job because you need that next paycheck. And the thing is, they have no idea what the problem is. They blame the economy, they blame taxes, they blame their spouse, they blame everything except the actual cause. And that's what we're diving into today. My name is Alex, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and specifically why some of the highest earners in the country end up completely broke despite their enormous incomes. If you're someone who makes good money but feels like you're not actually building wealth, or if you want to understand the specific traps that catch high earners and keep them stuck, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you actually see where you might be getting derailed.
Hey everyone! If you like learning new things the fun way, you are going to love what we do here. And the best way to keep up is simple. Hit that red subscribe button right below the video, just like this. When you subscribe, you'll be the first to see our latest tips, deep dives, and behind-the-scenes looks. Plus, tap the bell so YouTube lets you know the moment a new episode lands.
Now, before we dive into the 5 specific money traps that destroy high earner wealth, let me ask you something. When you think about someone making $200,000 a year, what do you imagine they're doing with that money? You probably picture a nice house, a good car, maybe some investments, a solid retirement fund. You imagine someone who's not worried about money, right? But here's the thing that nobody talks about. High income and actual wealth are two completely different things. You can earn a fortune and still be broke. And that's not an exaggeration. Over 40% of American workers making between $300,000 and $500,000 a year are living paycheck to paycheck. That's nearly half of people in that income bracket. The problem isn't their income. The problem is what they're doing with it. And there are 5 specific traps that catch almost every high earner who falls into this cycle. The first trap is what financial experts call lifestyle inflation, and honestly, it might be the most dangerous one because it doesn't feel dangerous while it's happening. Lifestyle inflation is simple. Your income goes up, so your expenses go up. You get a raise, and instead of banking most of it, you gradually start spending it on things that feel deserved after working hard. You upgrade your apartment, you start going to better restaurants, you buy nicer clothes, you take fancier vacations. And here's the thing, none of these things feel reckless in the moment. They feel reasonable. You've earned it, right? But the problem is that each upgrade permanently raises your baseline expenses. So when your salary goes from $100,000 to $150,000, you don't keep that extra $50,000. Within a few months, you're spending all of it on lifestyle upgrades. And then when you get promoted to $200,000, the cycle repeats. You're still broke. Think about this real scenario. A consultant is making $150,000 and gets promoted to $200,000. That's a huge raise, an extra $50,000 a year. He thinks, okay, now I can finally upgrade my life. He moves from a $1,200 apartment to a $2,000 luxury place. He starts dining at nicer restaurants, maybe dropping $200 on dinner instead of $50. He buys a car payment of $600 a month because, you know, a $150,000 salary should have nice things. He invests in designer clothes, country club memberships, premium everything. His coffee goes from $5 to $10 a day. His vacations go from domestic to international. His gym membership upgrades to an exclusive club. Everything upgrades. Within a few months, that $50,000 is gone. Then a few years later, he makes partner at $250,000. And he does it all over again. Apartment to house, private school, more memberships, more staff, more everything, and Pite making $250,000 a year. He's still stressed about money, still living paycheck to paycheck. The scary part about lifestyle inflation is that it's invisible. It doesn't feel like you're making a mistake because you're not technically overspending. You can afford the $2,000 apartment and the $600 car payment and the fancy dinners. That's the whole point. You have the income to justify these things, but the adaptation effect is working against you the entire time. Your brain gets used to the nice apartment and stops appreciating it. The fancy dinners become the new normal. The designer clothes are just what you wear now. And every single upgrade permanently locks in a higher baseline of spending that you can't go backward from without feeling like you're going broke. This is sometimes called the boiling frog effect in finance. If you jump into boiling water, you'll feel it immediately and jump back out. But if you start in lukewarm water and gradually increase the temperature, you don't notice until you're already cooked. That's lifestyle inflation. Each expense increase is so gradual that you don't feel it. But by the time you realize what's happened, you're locked in. Your identity is tied to your lifestyle. You can't imagine going back to that $1,200 apartment. Your friends expect certain things from you. You expect certain things from yourself. And the result is that someone making $250,000 can feel just as broke as someone making $50,000. Because they've built a lifestyle that consumes everything they earn. The second trap is the complete absence of investing and wealth-building focus. This one is brutal because high earners have the biggest advantage anyone could possibly have. They have excess income that could be deployed into investments. And yet, many of them never do it. They confuse income with wealth. They think that because they make a lot of money, they must be getting rich. But earning $300,000 a year and spending $280,000 of it means you're not building wealth. You're just spending a lot of money. Real wealth is what you keep and what you invest. There's this fascinating study that looked at millionaires in the top 1%. And you know what they found? The average savings rate for someone in the top 1% is 38%. 38%. But for high earners who aren't quite at that level, the average savings rate is only 12%. 12%. That's the difference between someone who becomes wealthy and someone who just stays rich for a while until they run out of income. Think about what that means. If you're making $200,000 a year as a high earner and you're saving 12%, you're putting away about $24,000 per year. That sounds decent until you realize that someone in the top 1% is saving $76,000 per year. The difference compounds dramatically over time. The power of compounding is absolutely insane if you actually take advantage of it. Let's say you start saving and investing $500 a month at age 25, assuming a 7% annual return. By age 65, you'll have about $1.2 million. But if you wait until you're 35 to start that exact same investment, you'd have less than $600,000. Just by waiting 10 years, you cut your wealth in half. That's the magic and the tragedy of compound interest. Now imagine starting at 45. You'd have less than $200,000. For high earners, this is tragic because they could be investing enormous amounts, but they're not. And they think they can catch up later. But you can't make up 20 years of lost compounding by saving more for 10 years. The math doesn't work that way. One of the most disturbing trends I've seen is that 52% of people earning over $100,000 a year now describe themselves as financial reactors. They manage money on an as-needed basis instead of strategically. They're not thinking long-term, they're not investing intentionally, they're just reacting to whatever happens next. They get a bonus and think, oh good, I can finally pay down that credit card. Or they think, oh good, now I can take that vacation. They never step back and think strategically about what they're building. And for high earners, this means they're leaving millions on the table over their lifetime. Someone making $200,000 a year for 40 years has earned $8 million gross. If they saved and invested 30% instead of 12%, they'd have an extra $2 million after 40 years, depending on investment returns. That's generational wealth. But they won't have it because they never made that psychological shift from spending money to investing money. The third trap is credit card debt, and this one specifically targets high earners because lenders basically hand them credit. If you're a doctor or a lawyer or an executive, credit card companies look at you and see a low-risk borrower. So they give you unlimited credit cards with $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 limits. It's insane. And because these limits are so high, high earners often spend without really thinking about it. They use the card for everything, and they justify it because they know they can pay it off whenever they want. Except most of them don't. According to recent data, 62% of high earners making over $300,000 a year are still carrying credit card debt. 62%. That's a majority, and delinquency rates for high earners have literally skyrocketed. In just 2 years, the number of high earners falling behind on credit card payments jumped 130%. That's not a small increase. That's a total collapse of financial discipline. Think about what that means. These are people who earn their way to the top 10% of income earners. They're successful, they're disciplined at work. But somehow when it comes to credit cards, they're a mess. The mechanics of credit card debt are particularly insidious for high earners because the amounts can get so large so fast. You charge $10,000 for a vacation here, $15,000 for furniture there, $8,000 for new cars, new electronics, entertainment. It's all on the card. And because your income is high, you're not panicking. You think, oh, I'll pay it off next month. Next month comes and you've added another $8,000 to the balance during the month. Then unexpected expenses come up. Medical bills, home repairs, whatever. And instead of coming out of pocket, you add them to the card too. Before you know it, you're carrying $50,000, $75,000, sometimes over $100,000 in credit card debt. And if that debt is at 18, 20, 22% interest, you're throwing thousands of dollars a month away just to interest payments. Let me do the math. Say you've got $75,000 in credit card debt at 20% interest. That's $15,000 per year in interest payments alone. $1,250 per month. That's money that should be building wealth, but instead is going straight to credit card companies. That's money that could be invested. That's money that could be growing, but instead it's just evaporating. And here's the worst part. Once you get into that situation, it's incredibly hard to get out because you're making more minimum payments than principal payments. So even though you're paying $1,250 a month, maybe only $250 of that is going toward the actual debt. And $1,000 is just interest. It's a trap that gets tighter every month. The psychological piece here is crucial. Many high earners use credit cards as a way to feel secure. It's like they've got a safety net, so they spend more liberally. They tell themselves that as long as they can pay it off eventually, it's fine. But eventually never comes because they keep adding to the balance faster than they can pay it down. And the shame of carrying that debt while making a high income is real. These are people who feel like they should have their act together. They're embarrassed about the debt, so they don't talk about it. They don't address it. They just keep charging and hoping somehow it magically goes away. But it doesn't. The fourth trap is not having adequate emergency funds. Now, this one might sound basic, but hear me out. For high earners especially, the absence of a proper emergency fund is a ticking time bomb. You'd think that someone making $250,000 a year wouldn't need an emergency fund, like if something breaks, they can just pay for it, right? But here's the problem. If your entire income is locked into your current lifestyle, then an emergency doesn't have a simple solution. Your car breaks down and needs a $4,000 repair. Instead of paying cash, you put it on a credit card because your money is all committed. You have a medical emergency with out-of-pocket costs. Credit card again. Your job situation changes unexpectedly and you have a gap in income. Now you're pulling from credit cards and draining savings that aren't supposed to be touched. Maybe the market tanks right when you need to liquidate investments. Now you're locking in losses. The trap isn't that high earners can't handle emergencies. It's that without a dedicated emergency fund, they handle emergencies by going into debt. And once you're in debt, it cascades. The study numbers are actually pretty shocking. About 40% of Americans say they couldn't handle a financial emergency without going into debt. 40%. But when you look at high earners specifically, the number is actually not that different. because the threshold for what counts as an emergency is proportional to income. A $4,000 emergency for someone making $50,000 a year is catastrophic, but a $15,000 or even $25,000 emergency for someone making $250,000 should be manageable if they've got emergency reserves. Without those reserves, high earners end up in the same position as everyone else, desperate and reaching for credit. One emergency becomes two emergencies because the debt from the first one is now consuming their monthly cash flow. A client tells me I had my transmission go out for $4,000 and I had to put it on a credit card. Then 2 months later, my water heater broke for $2,000. Another credit card. Then my kid needed orthodontic work that wasn't covered by insurance. Another $5,000. Suddenly, this high earner who makes $200,000 a year is carrying $30,000 in credit card debt because they didn't have an emergency fund. They didn't have that buffer. The other thing that happens without an emergency fund is psychological. You live with this underlying anxiety. You know that one unexpected event could blow up your entire financial situation. So you don't sleep as well. You're more stressed at work. You make worse decisions. Studies show that financial stress is one of the leading causes of insomnia and poor sleep quality. And when you're not sleeping well, your entire life suffers. Your decision-making suffers. Your relationships suffer. And ironically, that stress often leads to more stress spending, which compounds the problem. You're anxious about money, so you go spend money to feel better temporarily. You treat yourself to expensive dinners or shopping sprees because you need a psychological break from the anxiety. It's a vicious cycle that feeds itself. The solution is straightforward. Most financial experts recommend an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of living expenses. For a high earner, that might be $30,000, $50,000, sometimes over $100,000. That sounds like a lot, but compared to the alternative of perpetually being in debt crisis mode, it's a bargain. Think about it this way. If having an emergency fund prevents you from carrying $50,000 in credit card debt, you just saved yourself $10,000 a year in interest payments. 1 year. Over 10 years, that's $100,000. That emergency fund pays for itself many times over. The fifth trap is not distinguishing between depreciating and appreciating assets, and this one hits high earners particularly hard because they have so much buying power. When you can afford expensive things, you start buying them without really thinking about what they cost you in the long term. Let's talk about the most obvious example: cars. The average American spends about $13,000 a year on transportation costs. That's car payments, insurance, gas, maintenance. Over a 40-year working career, that's over $500,000, $500,000 just to drive. Meanwhile, if someone took that same $600 monthly car payment and invested it instead, they'd have over $700,000 by retirement. That's not a small difference. That's financial freedom. But cars are emotional purchases for high earners. You've made it. You deserve a nice car, right? So instead of driving a reliable $10,000 car, you finance a $60,000 BMW or Mercedes. That's $1,000 a month in payments alone, not counting insurance, which is probably $200 a month more for a luxury car, and maintenance, which is significantly more expensive than a Toyota. You're easily spending $1,400 to $1,500 a month just on the car. That's over $18,000 a year. But here's the thing that really gets me. The moment you drive that car off the lot, it loses 20% of its value. You're immediately underwater. You've destroyed wealth right there at the dealership. You just handed the dealership $12,000 in value that evaporated instantly. And this isn't just about cars. High earners make the same mistake with homes. Not the sensible house that they can afford, but the aspirational house that requires them to stretch their budget to the absolute limit. You see doctors and executives buying $2 million homes on $250,000 a year salaries. Your mortgage payment, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance probably eat up 40, 50, sometimes 60% of their income. While a house can appreciate over time, The problem is that you've locked up so much capital in it that you can't deploy that capital into other wealth-building vehicles. That money could have been invested. It could have been deployed into a diversified portfolio. It could have been kept liquid. But instead, it's locked into one illiquid asset that ties up most of your monthly cash flow. And if the market turns, if your income decreases, if your job situation changes, now you're trapped. You can't sell the house quickly. You're underwater if the market drops. You're locked into making that payment no matter what. High earners also spend significantly on depreciating consumer goods. Luxury watches, designer clothes, memberships at exclusive clubs. A $15,000 watch looks nice, but it depreciates the moment you buy it. A Rolex might hold its value, but most designer goods don't. They're status symbols that cost money and lose value. Memberships at golf clubs, country clubs, tennis clubs. These can easily run $5,000 to $10,000 per year or more. That's $50,000 to $100,000 over a decade. Money that could have been compounding in an investment account instead of paying for access to a club. High earners often have second homes, a beach house or mountain house that costs $200,000, $300,000 or more, plus property taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities. That's probably $10,000 to $20,000 per year just to keep it up. Over 20 years, that could have been $200,000 to $400,000 invested. The pattern is clear. High earners use their income to buy stuff that looks wealthy and costs them money. Meanwhile, the truly wealthy people, the ones with real generational wealth, they do the opposite. They live well below their means. They drive modest cars. Their houses are nice but not excessive. And they put their money into things that actually appreciate and compound. They buy rental properties that generate income. They invest in index funds. They build businesses. They buy appreciating assets, not depreciating ones. That's the difference between looking rich and being rich. Looking rich means people think you're wealthy. Being rich means you actually are wealthy, and those are two very different things. So here's the reality that I think most high earners are avoiding. You cannot build wealth on income alone. You just can't. Even if you make $1 million a year, if you spend $1 million a year, you have zero wealth. The wealth comes from the gap between what you earn and what you spend. For high earners, that gap should be enormous. But instead, many of them have no gap at all. They've structured their lifestyle to consume every penny they make, sometimes even more than they make. And the tragedy is that fixing this doesn't require a complicated strategy or advanced financial knowledge. It requires making intentional decisions about money instead of just letting lifestyle inflation and social pressure dictate your spending. The first step is knowing where your money actually goes. Most high earners have no idea. They know their salary, but they don't have a clear picture of their monthly expenses. They'll say, oh, I don't know, probably $8,000 a month in expenses. Then you actually track it and you discover it's $12,000 or $15,000. The tracking alone is eye-opening. It's often the wake-up call people need. Once you actually see the waste, the unnecessary subscriptions, the impulse purchases, the lifestyle creep, it becomes impossible to ignore. The second step is automating your savings. And this is crucial. The best high earners, the ones who actually build wealth, they pay themselves first. They automatically send money into investments and retirement accounts before they even have a chance to spend it. The money goes from their paycheck directly into their brokerage account or retirement account. They never see it. They never have the option to spend it. And because of that, they actually save. The third step is being intentional about your lifestyle. Not depriving yourself, but making conscious choices about what you're actually spending money on. Ask yourself about each major expense. Is this buying me actual happiness, or is this buying me status? Is this an investment in my future, or is this consuming my future? You might realize that the expensive car isn't buying you happiness, it's just buying you anxiety. The expensive house is buying you status stress, not peace of mind. The fancy vacations are nice, but they're not worth delaying retirement by 5 years. When you get honest about this, your spending naturally shifts. The fourth step is educating yourself about investing. Understanding how compound interest works, how tax-efficient investing works, how to build a diversified portfolio. It's not complicated, but you have to know the basics. You don't need to become a professional investor. You need to understand enough to put your money into low-cost index funds and let them compound. That's it. And the fifth step is probably the hardest one. You have to develop the identity of a wealth builder instead of just a high earner. Because the moment you see yourself as someone who builds wealth instead of just someone who spends money, everything changes. You make different decisions. You notice the trap before you fall into it. You see that $1,000 monthly car payment as a $500,000 opportunity cost instead of just a monthly expense you can afford. You see the $2,000 apartment upgrade as years of wealth building you're giving up instead of a nice place to live. The high earners who are actually building wealth are not that different from the ones who are staying broke. They don't earn dramatically more. They don't have secret investment information. They're just making different choices about money. They've closed the gap between their income and their expenses, and they're investing the difference. That's it. That's the whole game. And it's available to every high earner who's willing to break out of these 5 traps and start making intentional decisions. So if you're making good money and wondering why you're still stressed about finances, I want you to take a real hard look at these 5 traps. Lifestyle inflation. No investment focus, credit card debt, no emergency funds, spending on depreciating assets. I guarantee you're caught in at least one of them, maybe all 5. And I guarantee that the moment you break free from these traps, your financial life is going to transform completely. Not because your income changed, but because what you're doing with your income finally changed. That's the real wealth building secret. It's always been about the gap between what you earn and what you keep. Make that gap big enough, invest that gap consistently, and everything else takes care of itself. The money you make at 25 becomes $1.2 million by retirement. The money you make at 35 becomes $500,000. The money you make at 45 becomes significantly less. But it's still something, and that something compounded over years becomes a lot. So the question isn't whether you can afford to start building wealth. The question is whether you can afford not to. And if you're currently stuck in these 5 traps, you absolutely cannot afford not to.